If there's anything you think of when you first think of the name 007, you immediately think of a strong masculine male hero who saves the day by taking out the bad guys and whisking away into the sunset with the beautiful woman. And that's why 007 First Light from IO Interactive is under such a microscope right now, because it's a game that sits between two fires. On one side you have the fans who want James Bond to be the 007 they want, and on the other you have, well, the games industry, being their usual selves. But before we begin, let's thank the sponsor of this video, Game Boost. Let's be real, sometimes you want to buy a game but you don't like paying full price, and that's where Game Boost comes in. Game Boost is an all-in-one service that brings everything you need to enjoy video games at premium discounts. From in-game currencies, game keys, and more, Game Boost uses verified only users when it comes to these services. They're prioritizing safety and trust, ensuring that every payment is legit and nothing is a scam. They also have competitive pricing for game keys that have instant delivery upon purchase. You can use Visa, Apple Pay, it all works. You also get cash back on all purchases, which means the more you buy, the more you save as well. There's also instant 24-hour human support for any of your questions. You can snag games like Crimson Desert, as you can see, alongside games like Arc Raiders, Clair Obscur, and much more for deeply discounted prices. You can also buy full in-game accounts from any popular games if you want a head start, from Call of Duty, Roblox, PUBG, Fortnite, Valorant, and more, all entirely legit with secured purchases guaranteed. All this is designed to ensure you get the best experience possible with an intuitive interface, filter options, and more to make your shopping experience easy as it can get. Game Boost is also on Trustpilot, where only trusted gaming marketplaces are allowed to be as well, and Game Boost also has the ability to gift the keys you buy at a discount on PC as well, which can then be used on Steam, Ubisoft, Connect, Epic Games, and much more. So if you're looking for your next game to binge, want to top up your currency in a game, or want a certain item or cosmetic, Game Boost has you covered. Remember to use my code ENDEMION5 for 5% off your purchase. You can also click the link in the description box or pinned comment to access this exclusive offer as well. So if you've been waiting to play Crimson Desert or whichever other game, now's a good time to jump in. Thanks again to Game Boost for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to it. As PC Gamer says here, they just flat out ask, what if James Bond just shouldn't be in video games? And oh boy, here we go. Another masculine icon about to get put through the conformity of games media, so let's get into it. PC Gamer opens with this, where they acknowledge that GoldenEye for the N64 exists and that people love that game. But the angle that this writer at PC Gamer goes at is that last sentence, as you can see there, that when a game truly tries to make you feel like James Bond, it doesn't work in their opinion. Here's PC Gamer's argument. Admittedly, a lot of them are simply not very good video games, but also I think the very nature of James Bond is that he is a creature of cinema. He just doesn't quite fit into games. Part of this is, well, he's annoying. This might scan differently to non-Brits or indeed to anyone who doesn't share my particular brand of class psychosis, but James Bond is an insufferable public school dickhead. He's a rowing club Tory boy through and through, and he comports himself like a man who has a right to the earth and everybody on it. Tell me that you were shoved in lockers without telling me, PC Gamer, because this sounds like you're spilling high school trauma on a website for the world to see. Is James Bond toxic by nature? Yes, he's supposed to be that. He's by and large meant to be the ultimate personification of a man who gets the job done, and that doesn't always mean how he does it is exactly clean or right. He's a super spy by design, the very iconic figure he's been that has inspired countless other characters and stories around him. I wouldn't even be surprised if Solid Snake was inspired by 007, but I think the reason why James Bond resonates is because he is, by and large, the ultimate male power fantasy. Good looking, strong, capable, a ladies' man, the concept of a James Bond film has always been an event, and it was always Hollywood's push that whichever female actors at that time were at their pinnacle or up and coming, if you will, would probably play the Bond girls to whoever was playing Bond at the time too. This was the idea of James Bond. He is to men what something like Wonder Woman is to women, a powerful icon meant to personify the strongest and best parts of his gender. Although what makes Bond interesting is besides the rugged looks and license to do what he wants, he's not perfect, he makes mistakes, and at times even comes off a bit like a bad guy too. But that's the double-edged sword that works for Bond. He gets the men in seats because they want to see a Kino film about a guy blowing up stuff, driving fast cars, betting hot women, and shooting bad guys. But he also gets the ladies in the seats because they love guys who are dangerous and toxic and good looking, and if this weren't true, well, I mean, just go look at the modern dating scene and they can complain about that all they want. But who do most women usually go for? Yeah, the truth tells you everything. Either way, James Bond works because he's like a modern Trojan horse of ideas that works for everyone. Nobody wants a weak Bond or a feminist Bond because that's stupid. That's like making the Punisher from Marvel Comics vow never to hurt the bad guys. What's even the point then? But I think what you'll see as we go on is how PC Gamer especially wants Bond to not reflect the pinnacle of men, but to reflect them in all their pathetic glory. And no paragraph better illustrates this than when PC Gamer's writer here, whose name is Joshua Wolin, says this. But also, part of his charismatic arrogance is that he is suave and unflappable. Well, great, good for him. I am not suave. And I flap at the slightest inconvenience. I simply don't fit into him. Should probably reword that. Whenever I, as Bond fumble a counter, miss a shot, or try to duck into cover only to fling myself headfirst into a desk lamp, I break the entire spell of the character. This is such a self-tell. I'm baffled this Joshua Wolins guy actually read what he wrote when, oh yeah, this is gonna resonate. He really unironically just said, the reason why he thinks James Bond can't be masculine or a video game character is because he as a man can't relate to such masculine traits himself. This sounds like a man who's borderline lactating as he's typing this, the kind of guy that when he hears a loud noise he tells others to check it out, or even grabs the nearest child as a meat shield. I can't imagine being this sort of guy. Like, being awkward to an extent, okay, sure, everyone is somewhat, but to flat out claim that you cannot fit into James Bond at all in any way is crazy to me to admit. For every man watching, it's very important you do everything in your power to not fall into the same headspace as PC Gamer has here, and I hope and pray that every man watching this takes the time today to do some push-ups, maybe lift something heavy, just go for a walk even. Just please, for the love of God, do whatever you can to not embody what PC Gamer wants to see more in men. PC Gamer here then sounds like the kind of dude who likes to see his girlfriends make out with like other dudes or something and then pop a cocky wry smile and go, you maybe kissed her, but she's still going home with me. Like, who's the real winner? Like, Jesus, man, that's what this feels like. It's bleak. Like, please take care of yourselves, guys. Do not become like this. As PC Gamer says there, they just think that a character like James Bond should not be in fact a video game character that you should be able to control, again for the reasons above. Because to control such a toxic, misogynistic male character is akin to tyranny now. It sucks how much gaming has changed in the past decade and then some, because a James Bond in the 2000s or the early 2010s would be just how we would want our Bond to be. Brash, arrogant, lethal, and yes, even a womanizer. Women can complain all they want saying this is bad, but the reality is these are the kinds of men most women gravitate towards, whatever they want to admit it or not. I'm not even shaming them for it either. I've been a womanizer in my past too, look, I get it, so this doesn't surprise me why Bond resonates the way that he does for so long. Because it doesn't matter how much we progress as a society, the truth is stuff like money, drugs, and you know what, is always going to sell no matter how technologically advanced or distant we all become due to social media and then some. Stuff like dating apps and those websites I can't even mention on YouTube that allow you to subscribe for certain content, and you know what that is, they exist for a certain reason, because there's a market for it. It's a recession-proof desire, right? Entire tourist areas are built around this concept. Does it make it wrong? I mean, it's human nature. It's like saying it's wrong to breathe air or eat food. You can't deny what humanity wants after all, and that's kind of how I feel about James Bond as well. If you try to change Bond to fit into a box that he shouldn't be in, you end up with something made for no one but PC Gamer's Joshua Wolins over there. Joshua brings up at one point how Bond in First Light does what he calls cringe dialogue, like grabbing a teacup and then smashing it into an enemy's head while saying time for tea. And I mean, come on, that's what Bond would say. You know how Leon acts in Resident Evil, especially in the newest game Requiem, where he's constantly dropping one-liners in that game? It's because Leon is basically James Bond in Resident Evil. That's where he gets that from. So Bond saying one-liners makes total sense to me. It's also why games like Uncharted sold so well and resonated, because Nathan Drake was basically Indiana Jones meets James Bond. Like the perfect male power fantasy if I ever saw one. Like there's a line in Resident Evil 9 where Leon defeats this big mutated monster, and he says immediately after the fight, sorry, but I'm not on the menu. Like, yeah, that's something James Bond would say, and it's great. So if James Bond isn't dropping in the moment funny quips while beating up bad guys, then I really don't want it. Because like I said in the beginning, the dude is the blueprint for pretty much all male action heroes, game characters, and then some. You really can't deny it. To claim that James Bond needs to be removed because of his masculinity, because games journalists can't connect to him on a personal level, it's like to remove Spider-Man's ability to swing or cling to walls. At that point, these guys are no longer the characters we know and love, right? And actually, Spider-Man's a great example here, because in Insomniac Spider-Man 2, Peter is emasculated like crazy in that game. And that was one of the biggest complaints from many people, which is that Spider-Man doesn't really feel like Spider-Man in that game. He might as well have just set up a chair in the corner and watch Miles have his way with Mary Jane the way Insomniac positioned Peter Parker in that game's story's portrayal. But notice how you never saw a single website, PC Gamer included, say anything was wrong with how Peter was treated or shown in Spider-Man 2. It's because they relate to that sort of guy, because he was emasculated by design. His powers were weakened, his purpose reduced, he doesn't even save the day in the end either. Peter in Spider-Man 2 is the quintessential video games journalist version of a hero, because he's like they are, weak and pathetic. I mean, a fridge of all things takes out Spider-Man in that game. Some guy who can stop a moving truck with his strength alone gets taken out by a fridge. You get what you tolerate, I guess. But when it comes to Bond, I frankly want him nothing to be like Peter Parker in Insomniac Spider-Man 2. Because if Bond gets saved constantly by others, can't fight his own battles, and gets taken out by things like fridges, well, it's not really James Bond anymore. Just name the game Joshua Wolins from PC Gamer at that point, because that's pretty much who you'll be playing then. The problem is that the games industry as a conglomerate has an annoying level of influence on what game developers can or can't do, which is why, despite what PC Gamer cries about, I'm still worried about First Light's portrayal of James Bond, because it feels like he might still be the feminist version that Joshua Wolins over here wanted anyways. Cause we got another article from PC Gamer again, and it's titled, 007 First Light's James Bond probably won't be a sexist, misogynistic dinosaur. Some things fall by the wayside, IO Interactive says. I'm not gonna lie, fellas, that headline is kind of nuclear levels of what are we doing if I ever saw it myself, but here's what the cinematic director of First Light, whose name is Martin Emborg, said about the classic James Bond feel and if it would make it into the game. It's pretty simple actually when you look at all the films and all the interpretations, also in games and other media. It's always seen through the lens of the decade that it's made in, so you can tell how the same stories are being interpreted in different ways as the years progress. And it's been going on for 60 years, so it's our time to look at this character and see what does it take to save the world in 2026. And some things fall by the wayside and some things are more important than ever. That is very concerning because there's a lot to unpack there. As Emborg just said, Bond reflects the decade in like the movie that he's made in, right? Or I guess the game in this case. So when the movies were made 30 or more years ago, it was okay to have him to be the toxic male because that was normalized, is what I'm taking away from this. But as Emborg said, because this is now in 2026, Bond needs to reflect the ideals of the 2020s, which is a huge, big, fat, red warning sign. If I ever saw one, I gotta be honest. Because that means that James Bond will then not be the Bond we know then by omission. Or am I wrong? I'm not saying to boycott the game or anything, no. But I am just simply going off of what is being said here. If Bond is like supposed to represent the era that he's being in, I guess, then the current era means that Bond cannot be a misogynist. He can't be toxic. He has to be pro-women and immigration, and he effectively cannot really be James Bond then. He's just 007 in name only, sort of like how that one Scooby-Doo show made Velma into like, you know, what they did. But that show was also only Scooby-Doo in name, right? Same idea. That doesn't really bode well at all, I gotta be honest. Because the current era of modern audience stuff is not exactly what people want these days. If anything, the pendulum has swung so hard the other way that people actually want things to revert more so back to how they used to be. Stuff like traditionalism and the old ways, if you will, are being favored by many instead of the new, and you can't blame them. A 007 protecting the ideals of today's world is not a 007 that is reminiscent of what that character was supposed to embody in the first place. He is a maverick, right? He disobeys orders if he thinks they go against his ideals, and if Bond were to embody the current age morality of, say, modern day Britain, many would likely agree it's not worth saving nor protecting either. For example, here's an excerpt from the latest James Bond novel that came out a few years ago. The book is titled On His Majesty's Secret Service by Charlie Hickson. Let me read you one part of this book. Here's what it says. Just listen to this. Burkitt was an ex-Tory MP famous for promoting COVID vaccine, mask-wearing SG conspiracy theories which had spilled over into the usual anti-immigrant, anti-EU, anti-BBC, anti-MSM, anti-cultural Marxist, climate change denial pronouncements. It was an anti-trans diatribe that had eventually got him kicked out of the party, and he'd soon after set up the New Freedom Party. James Bond was struck by something. It was a long while since he'd been at any kind of function that was almost exclusively full of men. It felt strange. There was not even a pretense at diversity here. Athelstan, that's the main villain of the book by the way, hadn't been the least bit concerned about ensuring that half of the people he'd hired to carry out his coup should be women or non-white or disabled. Again, this is a real part of the book of the latest James Bond novel that came out in 2023 no less. Essentially, it's about James Bond fighting a man named Athelstan who is pro-white, anti-immigration, and I'm not kidding. This is why the comments from IO Interactive's people worry me, because what that new James Bond novel describes there is essentially what mirrors perfectly what Martin Emborg said in that interview, that Bond should reflect the modern values of the decade that he's being currently portrayed in. Which means, unironically, James Bond would be against, I guess for lack of a better word, anyone who wants their nation to be homogenous and not diverse, and anyone who is against anything that the government pushes these days. And if you ask me, that doesn't sound like Bond to me. That instead sounds like propaganda wearing the skin suit of James Bond in order to push narratives. So if James Bond in First Light is anything like his latest novel, God I hope not, then we are in the biggest humiliation ritual since Peter Parker and Spider-Man 2 then. I don't think it'll be that bad, hopefully, because that's, not James Bond. That character unironically sounds a lot more like Joshua Wolins. The PC Gamer guy who wrote that article about how he can't relate to James Bond because he's too pathetic. But I bet Joshua would unironically also love that version of Bond, because that that version has likely the same politics and belief system of a games journalist. And this is also why First Light worries me, right? Because James Bond has effectively been already stripped of his masculinity and narrative form, as you just saw. And also remember, that book was sanctioned by Ian Fleming's estate, you know, the guy who wrote and created James Bond in the first place. So they actually have to read that book and say that they turned Bond basically into a communist weirdo and went, yep, hit the presses, let's get that book out there to the people because this is what we want. And you can't say that I'm lying either. Here's an official description of the villain's intentions from Hollywood and HighDef.com as seen here where I highlighted. Athelstan of Wessex, that takes place over 2 months as Bond follows up on the murder of fellow agent 009 by going undercover to a castle in Hungary to infiltrate a gathering organized by Athelstan, who is recruiting and preying on easy targets radical extremists to help him make England English again. My God, like that's real. The villains of the latest Bond book are white guys who want Britain to be full of British people. Like that's the villain. You can see the propaganda clear as day. So again, when they say that Bond must reflect the era that he's in, that's the era that we are currently in right now, where concepts like nationalism are seen as radical and diversity is actually good and needed more of actually. Again, why would anyone who likes James Bond want to read a book like this? It just sounds like he's after British people. He's not even after like some super spy or anything like that. And if Bond in the game represents even an iota of what this book Bond apparently champions these days, the game is going to be dead in the water, at least on a story and thematic level. Sure, maybe the games journalists will like that and the few communists who will actually have the money to, buy the game in the first place. But games like this, I would wager, are likely hinging on the word of mouth of many who actually dive in to check it out themselves, especially on social media. I do plan to play the game myself to get to the bottom of this because I suffered through Veilguard, AC Shadows, and more for the channel already, so I guess I'm going to do it again. I really hope that I'm wrong though. I hope I come out the other side going, oh yeah, this game slaps. But when I see what current day Bond is really all about, and again, Ian Fleming's estate had to okay it in the first place, which I would imagine is the same with the game's plot as well, how exactly is that going to go over with actual fans of James Bond these days? Emborg does confirm in this interview as seen here where he says that beautiful women are there in the game and Bond himself is a young man. He's got game and he's very cool, but consider me skeptical because these days people will say anything to sell you something. I'm not saying that Emborg is lying, okay? I'm not doing that, but I do bring up a point I was told many months ago, which I brought up in a video about Ubisoft, where I spoke to people who worked at Ubisoft and they told me that when it comes to progressive ideas or things like that what the Bond novel was trying to push, the idea of making Britain again is bad would be things that many publishers and then some would be hiding in their media, if you will. They would hide it until you actually buy the game and then you would play it, and then a few hours in they would reveal their true hand to you, so to speak. The concept here, I guess, is that many publishers would now hide the propaganda that's in their games until the refund window would pass. So they would get your money and they would also get to push the message. Now again, I'm not saying IO Interactive is doing any of that, but either way, I am not convinced. That is the point. Emborg did say more, as you can see here, that people are worried about that kind of thing. I can't wait for people to play the game and experience the character Bond because everything we've done in creating this game has been to give you the richest, truest Bond that we can possibly make. I would like to believe them, I really would, but everything I see surrounding Bond right now has me worried. I truly hope that I am wrong though. I really do. But what I've noticed from PC Gamer here, the new Bond novel, and the way that male heroes in general are reinterpreted in today's media, is that this is about whether iconic male characters are really still allowed to exist without being torn apart by these ideological gatekeepers, if you will, that dominate large parts of modern media. That's really what it is. So what we're watching unfold around this First Light 007 game, at least in theory, is yet another example of these institutions trying to dismantle strong male archetypes on purpose because they fundamentally resent what those characters represent in the first place. They might get parts of them right. He can shoot people, he drives cars, whatever. But if Bond is, by and large, he's a male icon for a reason. It's because of his masculinity. Yes, the toxic parts and all too. The exact traits that James Bond was built upon are also the same things that modern entertainment increasingly treats like a problem these days too, and that's just the case. Everyone knows that. Because James Bond was really never designed to be safe. He was never designed to be sanitized or to fit inside these modern, corporate-approved ideological frameworks. He's supposed to be 007, and Bond is masculine by design. A man who just walks into chaos and then he just dominates the situation, right? That is literally the fantasy that you want. And for decades, everybody loved them for it. And that is why every single time you have a franchise that allows a male character to simply be masculine, like the Top Gun Maverick movie, for example, made over $1 billion and then some, the outrage cycle then immediately begins too, like we are seeing, right? We see it with many action films. We saw it with many games too. We saw it with Saros recently as well. We saw it with countless franchises where male heroes are either weakened, humiliated, infantilized, or rewritten to then fit these modern expectations. Now, it could be happening again with Bond, and I really hope that's not the case, but the reaction from parts of gaming media, like PC Gamer and such like that, has been unbelievably revealing if you ask me. Because the moment that 007 First Light starts presenting Bond as being charismatic and capable and attractive or masculine and traditionally heroic, is it really any wonder why PC Gamer would immediately start appearing to criticize the very traits that made Bond iconic in the first place? And this is where that disconnect becomes impossible to ignore for many, because normal audiences, they don't hate masculinity. Normal audiences are actually starved for it. Like, look around, modern entertainment everywhere right now, people are exhausted by weak protagonists. They're exhausted by self-insert dialogue and by characters written to lecture audiences instead of really inspiring them like they used to. They're exhausted by stories that are terrified of real strength. That is why audiences are still gravitating towards these powerful archetypes no matter what they do. It's not because people want oppression, not because people hate progress, but because strong men do matter. Strong men stabilize families. Strong men protect their communities. Strong men inspire the younger generations. And strong men, they also create ambition too. And cultures that endlessly demean masculinity eventually create weakness. That is not controversial to say. That is observable reality, and you and I both know that. This is why many male characters like Spider-Man or even Bond in No Time to Die, that movie, where he's holding the hips of a female agent on a bike, which is just ridiculous for Bond to do. Like, this idea that male characters must be incompetent, emotionally broken, and passive, cowardly even, and constantly mocked is why there is such a problem with all of this in the first place, and audiences are noticing that. That is why so many legacy franchises also feel hollow now, because the writers no longer admire the archetypes that they have inherited. Instead, they just resent them. And once creators resent the fantasy itself, the audience is going to feel that instantly. There's no way they won't. Because that resentment always bleeds into the writing, into the dialogue, the tone, the marketing even too. Everything then becomes about deconstruction instead of like real aspiration. Because for once, it looks like a major franchise might, actually embrace masculinity instead of always apologizing for it. And certain activists inside games media absolutely cannot tolerate that, like a PC Gamer and then some. So the backlash against this mindset is growing for a reason, right? Audiences are just tired of being told that every traditionally masculine trait is secretly problematic, that confidence is bad or strength or leadership, but it's totally great to make your villains all white guys all the time, because white guy equals bad always, apparently. What we need to really understand is that masculinity is not inherently evil. Young men grow up looking at examples, right? And these days, I can't even imagine being a young man, just seeing how grossly humiliated every positive or even somewhat strong depiction of manhood looks to them compared to when I was growing up in the 90s. The bigger issue here is not even really James Bond, really. It's just actually the broad hostility towards masculinity as a whole that has just infected large parts of modern culture. That's really the problem, because when these institutions have spent years teaching society that masculinity itself is inherently dangerous, you're just gonna create confusion, man. Especially among the younger men who were constantly told that their instincts and their ambitions and their identity are somehow wrong. Like, that is not healthy. A stable society does not demonize masculinity. The answer to bad men is not destroying masculinity itself. The answer is encouraging strong men with values, and that distinction has been completely lost inside many modern media circles, and it cannot be denied. So when you see gaming journalists attacking James Bond yet again, you need to understand what is really happening, right? This is not about improving Bond, or about modernization, or making the character deeper even. This is about discomfort with masculinity itself. Because Bond represents a type of man that modern ideological institutions increasingly do not want celebrated anymore, and that is a fact. And the harder that they try to erase those archetypes, the more audiences will gravitate towards them, and things that do meet those demands. Because deep down, people will still and always admire strength. They will always admire courage and discipline. And despite years of media activism trying to dismantle these ideas, the demand for strong male heroes clearly, that is not disappearing anytime soon. And that is exactly why 007 First Light has me nervous, because this can really go any which way now. Are we gonna get the James Bond we always wanted? Or are we gonna get that PC gamer journalist in a suit crying about how white men are bad all the time apparently? I guess time will tell. Either way, I intend to fight on myself, but if you're a man watching this, no, your masculinity is not a weakness. You are not wrong for wanting to be a man. You should embrace that feeling. You should revel in it and let it consume you. You're a man for a reason, so start acting like one. And thanks again to Game Boost for sponsoring this video. Make sure to check the link in the description or pinned comment to get 5% off your purchase. Thanks again to Game Boost. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you'd want to. See you guys next time, and always ask questions too. Right now, it's a gamble if we're either going to get the version that says it's Bond James Bond, or if it's going to be it's they, them. I guess we're going to find out soon, won't we?